In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. As we near the conclusion of our Advent journey and enter into the mystery of the Incarnation, which we will celebrate in just a few days, we ask for God's grace during this sacred time. We ask Him to send us the gift of His Holy Spirit to help guide us and encourage us as we build a sacred space for our worship together as the people of God, called to form the Church of the Most Blessed Sacrament. As we pray for our world and our nation and this local community, through the intercession of Mary, our good mother, may the Christ of Christmas, our Eucharistic Lord, strengthen our faith, renew our hope, and challenge us to live as He did. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A word of welcome to all of you who are joining us for this virtual presentation. We are delighted that so many are participating. Our parish committee has been working diligently and with much care to lead us through the process of building a church. And there are several components to this, and I'm very proud and thankful for all that the committee has accomplished. They truly have been co-responsible stewards for a project of such great magnitude. It is my honor to introduce to you now the chair of our committee, Mr. Frank Bavona, who will present to us an overview of the process so far and what will be covered in today's virtual meeting. Frank, welcome.
Thank you, Father. I am Frank Bavona, chair of the core committee to rebuild MBS Church. When we started this endeavor about a year ago, we knew it would be a long and difficult process. We also knew we would need a team of dedicated parishioners with talents to get the job done, and we have just that. Our core committee is made up of Kevin Boswell, Marianne Clark, Andy DeVecchio, Nick Gentile, and Brian McCauley. In our general committee of Doreen Alagia, Ernie Behrens, Barry Donnelly, Stephen Klenk, Peter McBride, Chris Morrow, and Paul Palmieri. It's a great group of people, and we're doing a great job. As you pass the church and see no signs of construction and an empty site, you may conclude that not much is being done. In fact, the committee has been very busy this past 12 months, and we've made great progress on several fronts, and we are now poised to take the next steps in the rebuilding process. Tonight, we will bring you up to speed on all that's happened and the plans for the future. You did receive a correspondence on 12/11, which outlines the events of the last year, and it's pretty detailed, so I'll assume that you've read it, but here are some of the highlights. We started all of these efforts immediately and worked on each of them sort of simultaneously after the fire. The insurance process, again, we started that in early January. We hired experts and professionals to assist us in that process. The insurance is through the Archdiocese, who have insured it with various insurers with the Lloyd's of London. The claim was submitted in early June, and it'll take some time to settle, but at this point, we have a reasonable estimate of what we will receive. It's not final, but a reasonable estimate. The process of insurance will drag on for some time, it's for certain, but again, we have a pretty good estimate at this point. Again, early on, we hired architects, Jim Hunt tonight, Foresight Architects and LAN Associates, who you'll hear from later. Any of you've met with them during the needs assessment process, and you'll hear from them again tonight. We built the needs assessment based on input from parishioners, ministries, and focus groups. That was very important in this process that we get that input. And we've designed a new church for your viewing tonight. It includes amenities that were planned for the renovation project of a few years back, a day chapel and public space. It was important, we felt, to include that in this new design. We've also established a budget, even though it's just an estimate at this point, at this stage, and I will go through that a bit later in this presentation. And lastly, we established a development committee to bridge the funding gap needed to complete the project. So I'd like to now bring it back to Jim Hunt of Foresight Architects, who will take you through our needs assessment review and then a detailed walkthrough our proposed design.
Before we get started, I'd just like to go over what the agenda is for this evening, so you'll be prepared. I'm going to first review the parish needs that we developed during the needs assessment, because that was sort of the measuring stick that we used for the design. Then we will present the design for the new church. Frank will come back and talk about the budget. Then we're going to take a short break where you will be able to submit questions for the team to answer. Then we will answer the questions, and then after we're done with that, this is toward the end of the presentation, we'll have a consensus poll to see if we're all in agreement on what's been presented. So please stay through to the end of the presentation so that you can participate in that poll, because you can only participate if you stay in the webinar. And then finally, Father will do some concluding remarks and closing prayer. So again, if the parish needs assessment report identified essentially 7 major needs, and I'm just going to go through briefly because you're all familiar with them. The one was to continue to foster a sense of community and welcoming by maintaining the original circular seating arrangement. That seemed to be pretty much the most universally agreed upon parish need. Many people asked that we provide more natural light in the new church, include a generous gathering space, avoid a modern design for the building, and finally do a better job of meeting the needs of the disabled and elderly parishioners, as well as those of families with young children. People also asked that the design of the layout of the church should reflect the name of the church by providing a more prominent location for the tabernacle. And finally, they asked that it reflect the history of the building that was lost to fire in some way having to do with the bells, which were the only things that survived the fire. So those were the goals of the project, were to meet these needs. Now, in addition to the needs that the parish developed, we had other guidelines that we had to use, and those were liturgical guidelines that are put forth by the church and the diocese. And this document, called Built of Living Stones, was our primary reference document. Virtually every meeting, we were looking through some portion of this document to look for guidance for how we should proceed. One particular quote that I want to take from it, which is one that a lot of churches struggle with, which is the general plan of the building should be such that in some way conveys the image of the gathered assembly. A lot of people struggle with what that means, but for your parish, it really lines very nicely with your first stated need, which is to continue to foster the sense of community with the original circular seating arrangement. So that was a good place to start. Now, the design team did look at other seating options, other types of arrangements, but one of the things we were trying to do was to consider ways for the church to be to have more seating and to have more expansion for some of the larger liturgies. So we went back to the original layout. This is the layout of the original church, and as you can see, the altar is in the center, and the seating is 270 degrees around it. And essentially, and an interesting point to make is that no one was more than 40'5" from the altar, which is very nice and close. Now, in modern codes, the pews have to be farther apart, and we were also looking to increase the capacity a little bit. But you see from this comparison that the new plan is pretty much like the other one. Some differences that we'll go through, but it's still seating the majority of the people 270 degrees around the altar, and the altar still in the center. So let's take a look at this. And by the way, the distance now from the altar to the farthest seat is 50 feet. So it's not much more, considering we increased the capacity by 23%. So let's take a closer look at a cutaway view of the proposed worship space. A cutaway view is if you slice the church at about 5 or 6 feet above ground and look down into it, this is what you'd see. So the main entry is off to the lower left. That's where you would come into the worship space, and we'll look at the whole building in a minute. But the first thing you notice is that if you take the cross axes of the building, that's where the altar is located. And the altar is located in the exact center of the space under a spire for a very important theological reason. and we felt it was very important to continue to do that again in this new building. The documents also suggest that the font to be aligned with the altar and be near the entrance. And again, this is something that you had in the previous church, but some of the complaints we got about the previous church was that the font was not accessible, it wasn't visible, there was not enough space around it. So rather than having the font out in the gathering space or the narthex, we've moved it well into the worship space. So you can see that it's here among the assembly, so that when baptism is celebrated, it's celebrated within the community and all can be part of it and all can see it. One of the ways we allowed for that is to provide this very, very wide aisle around it, which gives lots of space for children and others to gather around the font. But it also provides nice wide aisles so that if you're bringing in a funeral with a casket and pallbearers, they can go by the casket. Or if a bride is coming down the aisle, there's plenty of room without having to step around the font. So a lot of advantages to this wide aisle. In fact, the other aisles are also pretty wide to allow for more gracious movement in the space. And then importantly, the tabernacle is also on the same axis in its own reservation chapel. So while you always had a reservation chapel, it wasn't visible from the main entrance, and now will be, with some sort of transparency between the reservation chapel and the main space. And that is an enclosed room where it will be space for 4 people to kneel or sit and pray. The altar platform is larger than the original one to give us more room to work with. The other one was rather small. It's elevated 15 inches above the floor so that everyone can see. That's a little higher than the old one. And this one is handicapped accessible by the means of this curved walkway around the back. It's very, very shallow slope, so it doesn't even qualify as a ramp, which is why there won't be handrails on it, but there will be curbs on it to keep people from falling off the edges of either the platform or the walkway. And the ambo is set a little farther back from the center line on that platform so that it can better engage with the people on the sides. The music ministry is right behind that area off to one side. So they are in part of the assembly, which is a really important part, that the music ministry be in a location where they're both part of the assembly and where they can lead the assembly. And this is the perfect place for them. This is all flexible seating on movable risers, so the music ministry can reconfigure whatever way it wants to. There's also flexible seating on this side so that if you have more choir members, you can add here, or if you have special choirs for different times, there's all sorts of possibilities because everything behind the altar platform is movable. And speaking of seating, there are actually 3 types of seating in the worship space. Most of it is fixed seating, pews, as you had before, but there's also some flexible seating, as I mentioned, in the music ministry areas on either side of the reservation chapel, and also a couple of rows in the front of the pews here. And that is flexible seating, and we're talking church chairs, not folding chairs, very nice chairs that would match the pews. We provide that so that if from a liturgical point of view, we needed more space in front of the altar platform for one thing or another, those chairs can be removed and gives us more space. For instance, a funeral, you might want more space around the casket, so you might take out some of these chairs and leave others, all very flexible. And then the last row of flexible seating is the overflow seating, and you see a ring of seats around the back. Now, normally without these seats would not normally be there, and you would have this nice wide aisle to walk around the church, maybe do Stations of the Cross and other things. But when they are there, they're still part of the assembly, and there's still a generous aisle, still a 5-foot aisle around them. So there's plenty of room for everybody in the church. Now, let me just talk for a minute about the seating capacity and how we came up with that. First of all, the thing to know is it's a little bit hard to calculate seating when you're talking about sitting in pews because obviously there's no specific width. The building code of New Jersey says you allow 18 inches per person in a pew, but only on events like Christmas Eve do people actually sit that close. Normally people sit more like 24 inches on center or maybe even more. So what we did is we calculated it both numbers just to give you the range, the code maximum and what we think is sort of the normal seating capacity. So in the pews in the old church, that would give you a range of 372 to 498, plus there were 32 chairs. So a total of between 400 and 530 seats in the old church. In the proposed space, we have just about the same number in pews. We have between 392 and 523, just a little bit more, but we have a lot more flexible seating, as you saw in the diagram that I just showed you, which is 94. So that allows us to get a number more people in the church. And then we have overflow seating of 118 seats, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So that brings us to a total of 696 to 827 seats for worship. And you might ask, why so many seats? Well, we looked at all of the church keeps very careful records of the attendance, and we look back at the last few years at the First Communion and Confirmation Masses, and typically there's between 650 people at each of those liturgies. And the committee felt it would be really nice if everybody who came to those liturgies could actually fit in the church. And you can see that with the combination of the fixed seating and the flexible seating, and some of the overflow seating is in this church and some of it isn't, we would actually get up to that number. Also, last year at the Christmas Eve service, there were over 1,000 people in church. So we still won't be able to seat 1,000 people, but we may be able to accommodate more people in the chapel, and we'll get closer to accommodating everybody than we ever did in the previous church. So that's how we decided on the seating capacity. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the overall building design. You can see, now again, you see the main entry in the lower left corner. There is overflow seating in two spaces that are between the entrance and the main worship space. Some of it is in the space that we're calling the gathering space, and that would be this area here. And the other is in a space that we're calling a dining room, and I will explain the use of both of those spaces. But I just wanted to show you sort of the extent of the liturgical space. There are also two handicapped accessible reconciliation rooms right off the worship space, both allowing for both screened and face-to-face confessions. There are devotional areas on the east and west ends of the wall of the space. So one of those, at least one of those, would be a Marian shrine. There is a vesting sacristy located between the main worship space and the daily chapel. And there's a work sacristy for communion elements and cleaning and other storage items behind the space. And there's also a music rehearsal space, as well as a music director's office in this whole area that projects out to the south. Now that area is tall enough in the exterior of the building that above these rooms is a space would be dedicated to a pipe organ if we replace the pipe organ. So that the console, of course, would be on the floor, but the pipes and the works would all be above these rooms, and the pipes would come out probably over the reconciliation chapel. So we do have space in this design for a pipe organ as well. Pulling back a little bit farther, you can see now this gathering space. So as you come into the room, as you come into the church under the bell tower, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's this big wide open space that has lots of room for lots of things. There's places to sit and rest, there's places to chat, there's places to set up tables for selling things. It's a very big, open, flexible space with a lot of natural light coming into the space. And between it and the worship space would normally be glass partitions or doors of some type. But when we need to use this space as an overflow space, those partitions would be able to be moved out of the way to really tie these two rooms together so that the people sitting in this space would really feel part of the assembly. And the other room over here on the right is the dining room, which has a similar capability. This would be a solid wall that would also be opened up to allow people in this space to be able to be part of the worship. So you can see that with all the overflow seating, people are pretty much able to be part of the worship. And those rooms, though, also serve other functions, obviously. The dining room, our thought was, you know, if you were going to do a repast or something after a funeral, this would be a great room to set it up because it's completely isolated. You wouldn't be disturbing anybody coming into the funeral if you're setting up ahead of time. And people could easily come in to this space and use this space for that. There's a kitchenette off of it. It could also be used as a youth room. It could be used as a meeting room. So there are a couple of rooms that have this kind of multiple use. There's a children's liturgy of the word space, which is directly across from the daily chapel. And the reason we located those there was so that when children come out for children's liturgy of the word, which is a program that we'll be starting, the younger children would go into this space, which would they'd probably be sitting on the floor. The older children would go into this space and they would be sitting in the chairs. So we have two different types of spaces for children's liturgy of the word. Also in this space is a closet for the acolyte robes. So this room also becomes a space for acolyte vesting before church, so that the main vesting sacristy does not get crowded with too many people coming and going. There's also a small work sacristy and storage room for the daily chapel. The daily chapel seats about 90 people, and which would allow it to be used for small weddings and funerals. But everything in that room is flexible. So this storage space in the back is actually large enough to move the altar and the ambo and other things into that space, so that this room could be used for events that don't require the liturgical furnishings. Another important thing to note is that there is another entrance to the building here on the side, which is nearest the handicapped parking. And this, by the way, you can't see all of it in this cutaway, but there's a lot of glass here facing east. And then there's also glass here facing the south, looking out into the community. But with this entrance here and these doors being able to be closed off, this whole section of the building can be operated on a weekly basis, because it would have access to the sacristy, the daily chapel, children's liturgy of the word, and restrooms and other functions. So it's been designed to be sort of independent if that's what we want to do. So looking at the rest of the space, you can see there's also a little patio off of the dining room that can be used when the weather is good to go outdoors. There's the kitchenette I told you about. There's also, obviously, we need a large room to store all the tables and chairs that would be used in that room, because there would be different furniture depending upon whether it's being used for dining or for overflow or for youth room. So all that will go into that large storage room. There's also storage room for ministry storage. So all the things that come in for the food pantry or Christmas gifts, there's a very large room where they would go in. That's the larger of the two rooms you see here. And the smaller room would be the usher's storage. On the opposite side of the entrance, we have a bride's room, which also has its own toilet room, and just like the vesting sacristy does. And this room could also be used for small meetings. It's a lounge type space. So if you had maybe 6 people coming for a Bible study, that would be a great room for that space, whereas larger groups might use some of the other spaces that we have. And of course, we have the required utility spaces and the required toilet rooms. And as I said, that's all in this sort of wing of the building that can be used separately. And it's all located here to be as remote from the worship spaces as possible to keep the noise out. So that's the general layout of the interior of the building. I'm now going to turn it over to Matt Fink at LAN Associates to talk to you about how we arrived at the exterior design and how the building sits and works on the site. I'm sorry, I meant Matt Wolf, not Matt Fink.
Well, thank you, Jim. I do want to thank Father John and Frank and the committee team for the opportunity to collaborate. It's been an exciting journey up to this point, and we're really excited to continue to present our design here. A few things to note: we're about to walk you through 3 different photorealistic renderings. And as you can see, it's really exciting to see what the look and feel and the architecture of the building is going to look like. As Jim mentioned earlier, the materials and the final colors have not been finalized. We are recommending a variety of stone, slate, roofing materials, and other colors. They're definitely, in our opinion, appropriate and very close to what I think is the right solution. However, in the next phase of design, we'll be getting into a greater level of detail and specificity on those material items. So here we are. The first view, a very prominent view, standing at the intersection of High Mountain Road and Franklin Lake Road at the roundabout. I think this is a very popular view that most folks in the community would see on a daily basis. You can see a few very prominent features of the new building, starting at the top, a very prominent steeple with a cross topping off the building, signifying that this is a place of worship. You'll see how present this building is as it's located on the site. If you recall, the previous building was tucked behind many trees. It was very low-lying behind a few different landscaping berms. It was very difficult to see into the building, to see light, to see activity, and at times to even acknowledge if it's a church or not. Very deliberate effort during our design phase was to look at ways to engage the community. And you'll see here 2 or 3 areas that we really spent time focusing on to acknowledge the community and invite them in. The first one on the lower center of the building, you'll see this illuminated decorative wall. We're calling that a community outreach wall. There's a circular stained glass window there. And we really see this as an opportunity, almost like a lantern or a beacon, to not only show warmth and light, but also the opportunity to change the lighting color and the decoration in this area depending on the season. But this was one opportunity to engage the community as they're walking by or driving by, just showing some of the light of the building. Also, looking to the far right, you'll see a well-lit portion of the building, and that's actually the daily chapel. As we saw on the floor plan, that is off to the side of the building. We wanted to create that visual to invite the community in. Previously, there was very little line of sight to any windows or any activity in the previous building. Here we wanted to give that glimpse on a daily basis to see activity and light that may be occurring on that daily chapel. As we look at the architecture and the materiality of the building, one of the objectives during design was to not design an overly modern building. We looked at a variety of styles, from traditional to eclectic, modern, more contemporary. And the team really landed on what we believe to be the appropriate balance of taking traditional materials that stand the test of time, like stone and slate, and marrying that to a really good balance of contemporary and familiar architectural elements. You'll see, the gable roof lines. You'll see, a very strong stone base of the building. And then you'll see some more, what we're calling eclectic details, touches of precast stone, lintels and cornices along the walls. You'll see some touches of metal, some warm woods at the windows. And we really believe that this is an appropriate balance of traditional materials in a more up-to-date and appropriate style for your new church. As we also look at the base of the building, you'll see a variety of windows. We are proposing stained glass windows at most of the openings that surround the main worship space. We can move to the next slide. This next view is taken along Franklin Lake Road. You'll notice how the building extends much longer in this direction, and it really gives you a great understanding of the architecture, the form, and the presence of this new structure. Again, that steeple adorning the top of the building is very prominent and highly visible. Directly below the steeple, you'll see a very generous window. We call that a clear story window, which will welcome in adequate amount of natural light into the worship space. We actually have 3 windows just like this on the east, west, and north to allow light, natural light, to flood the worship space on a daily basis. As you move down the building, you'll see along the base of the building, again, the natural stone material, the stained glass windows. You'll notice some circular windows, decorative windows in areas of reflection. On the right side is where the daily chapel will occur. You'll notice how that's reaching out and actually steps out of the footprint of the main building. And again, this is one of those moments where we wanted the architecture to convey a sense of welcoming, a sense of outreach to the community. You'll notice some transparent glass and also stained glass in that daily chapel as well. On the far right, you'll notice some people congregating. On the right side of the building is a secondary entrance to provide direct access to the daily chapel. It's also a drop-off point for the elderly or handicapped visitors. And there's also some additional parking we're proposing, which we'll see momentarily as we look at the site plan. As I mentioned earlier, the materials used, the natural stone along the base of the building, some precast stone ornament at the heads of the windows. You'll notice some metal, some warm metals along the fascia of the building. And we're also proposing a slate material, which is a very durable material at the upper vertical walls along the roof lines. Let's go to the next rendering, please. And here's a very exciting view. As we look now from the parking lot, looking at the main entrance of the building, this is the view that every parishioner would experience as they approach the new building. Again, there's a few very prominent features: the steeple high up in the background. As you see the roof line step down to a more intimate pedestrian scale, you'll notice the new bell tower. This was one of those hot topics that we explored many different options. We looked at preserving the original tower. We looked at reinventing a brand new tower. And we believe that we landed on the perfect balance of preserving the old, salvaging the old bells, reintroducing them in a similar configuration, small, medium, and large, suspended in the same way that they previously were, in a new bell tower structure. And what's really exciting about this is not only the visual and audible connection that every parishioner would have as they approach the building, but you also get to engage and walk under that bell tower at the front doors. So we feel like this was a very appropriate, respectful treatment of the past and marrying it to the future, and creative way of making this bell tower structure part of your experience on a daily basis. You'll also notice in the foreground a very generous plaza. You'll notice plantings, a tree-lined alley or curved pathway leading to the front door. We see this plaza as an opportunity for fellowship before and after the services, an opportunity for seasonal events, a place of reflection, and really an added amenity, for your congregation to not only take advantage of the interior space, but also come outside and take advantage of this outdoor plaza space. Also want to point out the covered entry, as we call it in the architectural world, the portico share, or the covered entry, is an opportunity where vehicles could drive up to that front door, whether it be a wedding or a funeral. On the right, you'll see that curved walkway where there's two bollards preventing vehicles from getting on that walkway. However, they would be removable, and you could welcome a vehicle for a wedding to that front door. So there's a lot of flexibility with that plaza. But you'll see the overall composition and the design of the architecture is, I think, very respectful. It's clearly evident that this is a place of worship, with the steeple and the cross on top of the building. The bell tower also plays a very prominent role in the architecture and your experience as you approach the building. And you also notice some of the glass and windows up high on the top of the building, again, welcoming in natural light into the lobby and the gathering space, and also into the worship space. I think now we can move on to looking at the site plan. So the site design was a hand-in-hand effort, all along during the design process. As we developed the floor plans, we also looked at how does the building want to engage the site. We looked at the proximity to the roundabout. We looked at the proximity to the parish center. We explored the drop-off points and how many entrances are appropriate from a security standpoint and also a convenience standpoint for Father John and other parishioners to have direct access from the parish center to the new building. So you'll see two red arrows, the larger red arrow on the northern side or the top of the screen. That's your main entry point. That's where that last rendering perspective was developed, and you'll see direct access from the parking lot through the plaza, up the curved path to the front door and under that bell tower. On the right side, you'll see that smaller red arrow. That is what we're calling a secondary entrance or a drop-off point for the elderly or handicapped. That's also a good access point for folks coming to a daily chapel service. We're also proposing new parking in front of the parish center. You'll see a number of handicap spaces and also other spaces located so that the front door of the parish center can formally now be used as the entrance. If you go to the next slide, we also wanted to point out and share and graphically depict the footprint of the old building. This was the original church footprint. You can see the location to the parking lot and proximity to the parish center. This does not show the planned addition, which would have filled in most of the space between the church and the parish center. But one of the big design opportunities we saw as we studied the site, the great corner lot that the church owns, is that we have the opportunity to move the building further towards the roundabout and increase the presence and the presence of the building within the community. So we took advantage of that opportunity, and the building has moved considerably south on the site towards the roundabout. The setback on the left side of the page is approximately 90 to 100 feet, off the lower end of the building. The primary facade to the roundabout is approximately 120 feet, and also to the right between Franklin Lake Road and the church is also about 120 feet. So we still have a very generous front yard. However, we are taking advantage of the opportunity to push the building down out into a more prominent location to engage the community, to show life, to give a glimpse into the worship space, whether it be through stained glass or other visible windows and vanishing points. As we zoom in here, you can have a better look of the northern plaza, the main entry plaza. On the center upper portion of the page, you can see the semicircular profile of the entrance path. You can see the paved plaza area. That would be pavers. There would be some planting beds and some trees, but the majority of that plaza would be occupiable with a paving hardscaped surface. On the right side, you can also see the secondary drop-off and the semicircular driveway. So folks could come down there, drop off at that entrance, and then turn back and park in the larger lot. And also on the left side of the plan is that patio Jim mentioned earlier, which is directly off of the dining room. You can see how that is partially shielded by trees, but also visible to those walking by or driving by in High Mountain. Again, we wanted to create this semi-private yet visible series of spaces, outdoor spaces, for the church to use so that you can meet with the youth or an event outside and also have presence in the community. In conclusion, as we wrap up looking at the exterior, as we looked at the site plan here, I think a few things are evident. The presence in the community is enhanced, many times over from the previous design of the old church, just due to the nature of pushing the building out into the site, creating more transparency. the idea of a beacon of light, comes to mind. And there's definitely a lot of moments of bursts of light and opportunity to see the life and energy coming from the new church. So at this point, I would like to pass it over to Frank as we transition to the next topic.
Thanks, Matt. So now you've just seen our beautiful new design. And I guess you're asking a couple of questions. And first might be, how much will it all cost and how are we going to fund this? What I'm going to present here is a simple schedule that outlines the finances of this project. But as Jim mentioned early on, these amounts are clearly just estimates at this point, and based on what we currently know. You, like me, might be surprised at the cost of a building, such as this, building a new church. Some might call it sticker shock. In fact, the old church was built in 1980, and the cost at that time was roughly about $1 million. 40 years later, it's a bit different. As you can see by the first slide here, the first section of this is the cost of building the new building. And you can see it totals to about $16.5 million, big number. Breaks down in various categories. The site work first, which includes utilities, parking lots, excuse me, water, septic, some of the things that we didn't have before, like a fire suppression system, things of that nature, drainage, sidewalks, landscaping, etc. That's a pretty big number, about $1.3 million. Broke down here on this schedule the construction of the worship space separately from the day chapel and the public space. The reason I did that is you can try to draw comparisons to the old building, and you can see that later on the insurance slide. But the cost of constructing the worship space which again, as Jim went through, is slightly larger than the old space, but creates a little bit more overflow space, is about $6.2 million. The day chapel and the public space, which includes, importantly, amenities that we had planned for in our renovation project of a few years back. Remember that fundraising and that project was all about adding a day chapel and public space. Under our current design, that's going to cost about $4.4 million. Stained glass, artwork, and furniture. Again, this is just estimates. We don't have any real specifics at this point on that. That's going to cost roughly $1.1 million. We've slated in. Music, pipe organ, and audiovisual equipment. It's amazing. The cost of our old organ was quite a beautiful organ, and to replicate that, we're slating in about $800,000. So a lot of money for those types of amenities. Professional fees, whether it's architects, engineers, lawyers, you name it, we have to hire them all, and they're great people and they're helping us along here, but they're costly. We've estimated that at approximately $1.2 million, and we've slated in a contingency reserve here, as you would in any construction project for any overage. So if you add all that up, it's $16.5 million. Again, I think it's a pretty conservative estimate given the fact that we have a contingency reserve in there. So I think we're covered there. But again, it's a big number. So then the next question you might ask is where are we going to get the funds to pay for all this? The next slide shows you a breakdown of what we have on hand. We did collect or have pledges for $2.6 million in funds related to the old renovation project. And, importantly, we went out early in this effort to gain acceptance from those who funded or pledged that we could use these funds towards the reconstruction of a new church. And luckily and gladly, we've received permission to do that. So that full $2.6 million is available to fund this project. Additionally, we have we started a reconstruction fund. Really haven't done a campaign around that, but we've been lucky enough to collect about $400,000 of newly donated funds. So if you add those two together, we have roughly $3 million on hand or in the form of pledges. The insurance claim is a big component of what we're going to do here in terms of funding. What you see in front of you on this slide totals $9.5 million. This is an estimate. Importantly, this is an estimate of what we think we will receive, not what we've claimed. We've claimed a bigger number. So what we've claimed is the total replacement cost at today's rates and with today's required code upgrades. For example, you didn't need a fire suppression system in the old building in 1980. We certainly do so now, not to mention other things like handicap accessible, bigger bathrooms, more spacing between pews and things of that. That ramps up the cost in a pretty big way. So we've claimed that as well. But various other things, and I've broken down the various things we've claimed: pipe organs, contents, etc., professional fees, business interruption for money loss for weddings and funerals and all those kinds of things. But because of policy limitations and exclusions, I think it's important to note that we may not get the full recovery. So again, this is an estimate at this time, and we're going to update it as we go. And it could take some time before we have final resolution on this. But I think we have, again, a pretty good estimate of where we're going to come out. The last line in this on this slide it totals up everything. So just to go through it, $16.5 million to build the church. We have 3 on hand. We assume we're getting 9.5 from insurance. That leaves us a gap, what we're calling a funding gap, based on these estimates of up to $4 million. If we do better in insurance, we might narrow that a bit, but we're guessing right now $4 million. So in order to build this beautiful church, we certainly have to fundraise. So, you know, if you think about it, we're planning to build a beautiful new church, and with all the building amenities that we've talked about, overflow space, more room for parishioners and certainly a beautiful day chapel with new public space, which is really going to enhance our ability to engage our community. So in order to meet that goal, we're going to have to fundraise. Along those lines, what we've done is we've already formed a development committee, and that's going to be led by Brian McCauley, who at this point I will hand off to give you a full overview of, or a brief overview of that process. Brian?
Start off with, Frank introduced me, Brian McCauley, and I've been tasked with the job of leading the fundraising effort to rebuild our church. My wife Jane and I have been parishioners at MBS for over 40 years, and we were heartbroken by the tragic fire that destroyed our church. The parish has been such an important part of our lives and the lives of so many in our community. We just must rebuild the church. So as Frank pointed out, and as you've just seen, the overall design of the rebuild of the church is substantially complete and reflects the parish input from the surveys we took last spring. The design includes the planned enhancements of the original church that we were planning to start actually the early part of this year. The estimated cost to rebuild sits at about $16 million, the bulk of which will be funded from insurance proceeds and the funds raised for the planned enhancement of the prior church. But that gap, as Frank pointed out, is still about $4 million. So we have assembled a development committee whose names are on the screen. And the first meeting of this committee will be on December 29th, and we'll start going. Very broadly speaking,
The committee's job is to solicit funds to fill the gap. It is a process. And like building the church, it will take a considerable amount of effort and time, probably a year or more to achieve our goals. Especially in this COVID-19 environment, you'll have to get creative to get our job done. On the screen is a broad overview of the process that we'll be going through. There are a lot of materials we developed. We have to get updated information, a little more firm on the insurance and the cost of construction, and that will be coming in the first couple of months, I hope. We got to identify some creative fundraising opportunities. When you look at COVID-19 restrictions on meetings and so forth, traditional fundraising, you visit people, you sit down with them, you give them the project, explain what it is and how important it is. But it's going to be a little bit different. And this is what the committee is going to have to come up with, is the creative way to approach these fundraising efforts. We're going to try to identify and solicit potential donors outside the parish community as well. There's archdiocese support that we'll be looking for. We're working with the archdiocese fundraising people to approach others who would be like-minded in supporting this church. Local businesses, foundations and trusts and so forth are going to be what we need to kind of fill this gap. So I would hope that all of you will join in this effort by responding generously when a committee member reaches out to you. The committee members will get together on December 29th. And from then on, you start to get reports about what we're doing.
All right. First one is, will the Archdiocese contribute capital? The answer to this is we don't know yet. We obviously, every step of the way we go through the Archdiocese because we need approval on certain things. We've had very senior conversations with them about all aspects of funding and how we're going to pay for all this. But there's been no decision on contributions. Obviously, they would like to see us fund it through the combination of funds we have and, of course, insurance proceeds. But again, we haven't broached that subject with them. So, okay, next question or next comment. If we have 12 million in funds, why not build a cheaper church ahead of schedule? So it's a good question. I don't think the schedule has much to do with it. We're not waiting. One of the things we decided to do early on was to move on dual paths, meaning do the insurance and the building design at the same time. I don't think any of this has, the cost of the church has anything to do with the schedule. We do have the funds on hand to get started here and begin the building process, and there's a reason to believe that a substantial amount of the insurance proceeds can be achieved fairly early on too. If the question is why not build a smaller church or a cheaper church, which equates to smaller, I think the issue there gets to the fact that we wanted to build the same worship space that we had before, and then include the funds that we got before for the renovation and expansion project, because we wanted to make sure those amenities were there as well. And part of our agreement with those who pledged in the past, paid and pledged in the past, was that those amenities would be included in the new church. Okay, would it be possible to sell off some of the property behind the school to offset our funding deficit? I guess, anything is possible. I happen to know, based on my other position, that there's a requirement for a certain amount of acres in Franklin Lakes for a house of worship. You know, I think to get back there, that space is, I guess, buildable, but it would take away from certainly it'd be a hard spot to get to and such, and I'm not sure that's feasible given what we're doing. Something to consider, but again, that's not been you know, our approach thus far. Why is the insurance claim taking so long? You know, I'm sorry for the chuckle there, but it's we have a great team working on that. Marianne Clark and Nick Gentile and myself and others. We've been, Andy DeVecchio has been a big help on this as well. It's a complicated process. This is a major claim. It's a total loss. You know, basically it's trying to reestablish what it would cost to rebuild that old building at today's prices and under today's codes. And it's just, you know, any claim of this magnitude is going to take a long period of time. That's just the nature of insurance. This is not Allstate or Progressive that, you know, they'll have a check for you the next day. There's going to be an argument. There is an argument over, you know, what the claim should be. We have a view and the insurers have a view, and we're going to argue over this, and it's going to take a while. Having said that, we're going to push through and try to minimize that time and maximize what we get. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. My question is, if the financial goals are not met, what is the process for what will be cut and in what order? Will, with a $4 million shortfall, has the committee looked into ways to reduce costs? So, yeah, I mean, I don't think you go into a project like this without, you know, secondary plans, but or you know, we want to build the church that we've designed. We're very excited about it, and we think raising $4 million is feasible. Sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. If we're not able, I mean, I get a couple alternatives here. One is we may get more insurance money than what I put in the schedule, so that the shortfall might be less than $4 million. And I guess the other side of it is if we fall short of raising $4 million in terms of fundraising, clearly we would have to look in ways to re-engineer and save some money, and that would probably be at the loss of some public space and certain amenities. So yeah, we haven't done that work yet, but we clearly have that option. But our goal is not to downsize it at this point. We think we can do what we've designed. During the previous capital campaign, funding was collected over a period of 3 years. Is that the case here, or is there a funding deadline? You know, I think the issue there is, you know, let me just explain quickly that the next stage in our process is doing a deeper dive into the design process and creating things like bid documents and getting approvals for building and such, planning documents. And that could take a couple of months for sure. The actual construction process will take upwards to 18 months. Could be less, but you know, I think a conservative estimate. So you have to have funding over that period of time, you know, and fundraising over hopefully a shorter period of time. But that's also where we would look to the Archdiocese for help in terms of any kind of bridge that we would need there. Last question that I see, well, there's more. Will the Parish Center exterior be renovated too? Right now, there are no plans to do any material renovations to the exterior or interior, for that matter, of the Parish Center. You did see that we're adding a parking lot to the front of the building. It's clear that the Parish Center needs some facelifting, but that's not in this plan at this point in time. Is there an estimated time of construction beginning? Again, and the next question is, when might the church be finished? Realistically, we're talking well into 2022 for the project to be finished. That assumes that we get approval on this design, which we have from the Archdiocese. It assumes that we get approval on the bids from the Archdiocese in a couple of months, and it assumes we get a shovel in the ground in the spring, and then we could be midway to second half of 2022 to be finished. I'm told, I'm not an expert in these things, but I'm told it takes that much time to build something of this magnitude. Yeah, Brian McCauley, I don't know if Brian's here, but I think Brian outlined. Are you there, Brian?
Yeah, I'm here, and I think that the answer to that is there probably will be opportunities, but they will be limited. That's something that really Father John will be probably most instrumental in saying what kind of opportunities we might have. But that is one of the things that the committee will be looking at and discussing with Father John to see what we can do that's going to help raise more significant amounts of funds. For instance, one of the things that we will be considering is there are a lot of people who used to live in Franklin Lakes and have moved away, have been parishioners and so forth, and reaching out to former parishioners, I think, is going to be a part of the project that we take on.
Well, the insurance claim in total, and there are various components of that insurance claim, but the bulk of it was about $13.1 million that we submitted, and you might see in the schedule I've submitted to you tonight. We've estimated $9.5 million. That's based on, I think it's conservative. I think it's also somewhat realistic too, in that we're pretty sure of certain categories there. And why is it less? Well, partly I think it's less because the policy that we have, and basically this is not a policy that we go out and buy ourselves. It's bought for us by the Archdiocese, but that policy has certain exclusions and limitations, and is subject to professional opinions. So we hired two firms to help us with that. One of them is LAN Associates, who's our architect too, to work on the code enhancements necessary, and the other was a cost estimator to reconstruct the old church based on the old plans and such. So we have our number, they have their number, and I can tell you since June 2nd, we have been discussing that number with them and negotiating every step of the way. So again, it's we may get considerably more than $9.5 million, or I guess it's even possible we could get less. But I would think at a bare minimum we should get what I'm suggesting there. And we're not going to give up the fight. We'll keep fighting until the end, but realistically, it could take a long period of time. So we've decided to go this route, which is a dual path, rather than wait for a claim settlement on an insurance policy. Well, it's not a matter of delay. We're not delaying. We're trying to maximize the insurance claim. So my 9.5 estimate has taken into consideration the fact that, or the possibility that we may not get everything we ask for or deserve. I think the answer is yes to that, mainly because we do have I don't want to get into all the fine numbers, but we do have in agreement with the insurance companies on a base amount that is substantial. That'll give us the ability to fund off of that. It won't be enough to complete the project, but again, our hope is that we get firmer numbers in the next couple of months on this, and then we can set up a funding schedule of when that claim is going to be paid and coordinate that with the cost of construction. And to the extent we needed the Archdiocese to help bridge financing through that, we would pursue that.
Why do we need a room for the Children's Liturgy of the Word? That's a program that we had started to talk about pre-COVID, in which we were going to use a room at the school since it was right off of the gym. But many parishes have these dedicated places where the children can go safely without leaving the building and listen to the word on their level by a trained catechist, and then resume the rest of the liturgy with the liturgy of the Eucharist. So that was a need that the parish had expressed a concern about. Why do we need 2 reconciliation rooms when one is rarely used? Well, we'd like to have that as an alternate, perhaps conference room for a priest or someone else to have a conference with a parishioner. So we think that there would be a value to having 2 separate rooms. Why do we need a bathroom in the sacristy, for goodness sake? Well, it's really for the privacy of the priest and the assistant ministers who are there, that they can have a place that's dedicated for their use. Has a study been done on how many people are likely to come back after the church being closed all this time and after not attending due to COVID? Not at this local level. There might be some diocesan or even nationwide studies on it, but I'm not familiar with any of them yet. Is a daily chapel really necessary? Well, it was part of that first case that we had with the renovation of the church, and there was a demand for a daily mass chapel, also a dedicated place for smaller weddings and funerals. So to that extent, yes, it would be necessary in this of the building of the new church. Do our current weekly donations cover the projected maintenance costs? So that's a very good question. Our finance council has been discussing that to a certain extent, and it'll be something we'll need to continue to monitor as we look at the restoration of our church. But as of right now, the parish, through the generosity of our envelope system and other ways of giving, the parish has been very responsive. So we would hope that the answer to that would be a yes.
All right. First question here. For the chapel windows, can we have stained glass windows instead of regular windows? So as of right now, we have stained glass at the front of the room for the daily chapel. And on the side window, we did envision some degree of transparency. We have not done the final design for that transparent window. I think there is a degree of some privacy, but also wanting to allow the community to see in is the design opportunity. We do see opportunities for incorporating more decorative glass there and also on the opposing wall near the drop-off. Next question. How do the exterior materials of the church fit with the school and community center? Should any complementary work be done there? Why isn't the church exterior going to match the rectory and the school brickwork? Who made this decision to have clashing exterior? So when we started to look at the material palette for the new building, we did take into consideration the brickwork of the existing parish center and the adjacent other buildings. The idea and the committee's point of view was that it did not need to be an identical match or even a direct relative to the brick or even the style of the parish center. You know, we really set out to design an appropriate new church, an appropriate style. and also material. The idea is that the stone would have some warmth and earth tones in it that would allow it to complement the existing parish center. So the idea is that they would not clash at the end of the day. Next question, can you speak to the interior materials? So as of right now, we are far enough along in the design process to have developed the materials that you've seen tonight. You saw the floor plan, the site plan, and the exterior of the building. And we deliberately have not jumped into the interior design just yet. There was enough decisions on the table and enough design that we wanted to share with the entire parish tonight before we proceed to that next phase. So we do not have any materials for the interior prepared just yet, and that will be addressed once we are approved to advance to the next phase. Question, can the church be flipped so that the front faces one or both of the main roads rather than facing the parking lot? So the entrance, the primary entrance that faces the parking lot, there was some discussion on orientation of the front door, which is really the back of the building as it faces the parking lot. And a few considerations that really dictated the overall site strategy really had to do with proximity to the parking lot and the travel distance from your car to the front door. There is a certain balance and distance that we are trying to maintain. As you've seen in the drawings, there was a generous plaza, which adds, some distance, from the drop-off lane. But we thought that was reasonable, that it was dressed up with, a variety of plantings, and that was part of your transition from the everyday to the spiritual. So we felt like the overall layout of the site right now was appropriate. If we were to move the front door to High Mountain Road, that would obviously increase your travel distance even greater from the main parking. So that was, really, dictated by travel distance and proximity to the majority of parking. And this also does talk to the point of the front door is really the back of the building. And that's why we deliberately created these, what we called community engagement walls, or opportunities to bring light to the community, whether it's through a decorative stained glass window or a feature wall or a degree of transparency into the daily chapel. Each of those moments creates a potential visual connection with the community and the parish. Next question. Will the bell tower be a working bell tower with the ability to ring the bells? So the bell tower, we do currently have the opportunity to create a working bell tower. We have not worked through all those details just yet. There will be likely a movable clapper or degree of movement to the bell to actually ring the bell, and then there will be a series of speakers to amplify the sound. So those details have not been worked out yet, but there will be enhancements so that those bells do function to some degree, and then also we amplify the sound. Next question. Do you consider alternative locations for the bell tower? If so, what are they? So like we mentioned in the presentation, the bell tower was a hot topic where we did spend a considerable amount of time looking at multiple options of keeping it in its current form, as you see it standing right now. We looked at keeping it in its location, but reinventing it. We looked at obviously relocating it completely. The challenge with keeping it where it stands right now is that it actually overlaps the dining area, actually the closets and the kitchenette area. So it did not really overlay in a prominent or appropriate location with the new building plan. The building committee agreed that we should not let the existing bell tower dictate the optimal layout and plan of the new building. So as a team and a building committee, we did look at 2 or 3 options of different floor plans, incorporating the old tower location and also proposing the new. Let's see, next question. The view from High Mountain Road and the existing floor plan do not match. There are no entry doors and patio. There was no view from High Mountain Road. The first view we started with, the first rendering, was standing in the roundabout or the intersection between Franklin Lake Road and High Mountain Road. So we started at the intersection, then we went to the right up Franklin Lake Road, and then we went behind the building to see the main entrance. The next one, this church is huge. How much will maintenance cost? So the building is larger than your existing and previous church. Factor in the intended addition that you guys were planning. The building is slightly larger than the original footprint and the addition footprint. And the primary reasons were the additional programmatic spaces and the additional needs to support, current and future ministries. As far as the maintenance goes, we curve, I think Father John may have mentioned as far as giving and future operating expenses, there's a team that will be looking at that. Part of the planning effort to cut down on maintenance was creating a very efficient floor plan. As you could see in the building design, there's not an excessive amount of corridors that meander around the entire building. You'll see that it's a very efficient floor plan. You walk in the entrance and the narthex and gathering space, and you have direct access to the dining area or the worship space or the daily chapel. Part of, an architect's and engineer's strategy to, limit, heating and cooling and the overall size of a building is to try to design an efficient and optimally planned building. And we believe we've done that, based on the efficiency of the building, and tried to scale it down as much as we could at this point while still meeting all the programmatic requirements. Next question.
I'd also like to mention, Matt, that, as designing a new building, a 40-year-old building is always going to be more expensive to maintain than a new building. So there's an offset in the fact that everything is, and with newer materials, and we've also designed with very low maintenance materials as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. I mean, this building should be better performing, better insulation, better windows, less heat gain. It is going to be more of and the energy codes are more stringent nowadays, so it will be a better performing building. Okay, so the proposed church steeple appears too contemporary and Spartan. Is a more traditional design compatible with the body of the church possible? So that's a good question. So this is the concept design presentation. This is not the final. This is showing, the intent and the direction of the building. We can certainly take that into consideration, as we develop the further detailing of the steeple and also the bell tower. So I think, looking at that is certainly an option as we advance to the next phase. Next question, will any of the bricks from the old bell tower be used in any of the design? And are the bells safe in the open air? So I think there is an opportunity to salvage some of the old brickwork. Right now, there's no intentional way to incorporate it into the new design as far as the interiors, but that's certainly a detail and an opportunity we can explore. There's, as you guys know, the tower is still standing. There's a way to carefully demolish or selectively demolish and retain some of the existing brickwork. So I think that's something we can circle back with the committee and Father John to explore ways to salvage or save or use those bricks in a respectful way. Next question, is the decision to keep the old bell tower final? Architecturally, it seems a bit incongruous. So the decision, well, as the new design is proposing, is that the old bell tower would be demolished, would be removed in its entirety, and that the bells would be salvaged. You know, those bells, I believe, are over 100 years old. They were from another parish, I believe, in upstate New York. So there's some great history behind those bells. And we are looking to refurbish and reuse those bells, but in the new configuration, as you saw in the renderings. So the idea is to demolish the old tower, save the bells, and then redesign and recreate that bell tower in a more complementary manner with the new architecture. Next question, are there any additional emergency exits? So it's a balancing act with the building code and functionality as we look at emergency exits. The building code does dictate your travel distance out of the building, out of the worship space, and out of any of the ancillary spaces. So we are right now meeting the code requirements. And there's also a matter of security, you know, as far as safety and security, you know, concerns go. We don't want to have an excessive amount of access or entry points around the whole building. You know, we did talk about that as a team and came to an agreement with Father John on what seemed manageable, just from a security and a facility management standpoint. So right now, we believe we have the appropriate amount of entrances and exits. Hi, the design looks great. I think the sidewalks are a great idea to invite the community and the parish to use the property better. Will these be included for the entire surrounding property as well as the main driveway off of High Mountain Road where overflow parking generally has existed? So I believe the answer is yes. I know Frank and the building committee has been very adamant about the desire for sidewalks around the perimeter of the property, around, you know, Franklin Lake and High Mountain Roads, and knowing that the overflow parking has been you know, off of High Mountain, you know, we do want to welcome people, you know, onto the property as well. So I think that would be a nice feature, have sidewalks leading in off of High Mountain to the building along the existing driveway. Next question. This is about the side/auxiliary parking and side entrance. Respectfully, the rush to get a handicap parking spot can resemble a chariot race. Think Spartacus on a Sunday morning. The side entrance only allows one way in and out in what seems like a small space. I worry that a handicapped person walking slowly could be at risk from the energetic drivers trying to compete for the last handicapped spot. Wonder if that auxiliary parking area could be one way, leaving from a different access point. That's a good, thoughtful question, and you're right. You know, there will be a demand for those spaces. And we did look at creating a one-way entrance into that area and exiting to the far right of the parish center. And the concern with that was that then this could become a pass-through where that may welcome more people to cut through that area to exit the property after church. And we actually felt like there'd be more high traffic or activity through that area, making it a little more less protected area. So we designed the parking to have a sidewalk and at the front end, at the nose end of the cars where the parking stalls would occur. So you could get out of your car and then walk along the sidewalk without having to cross the street to get to that auxiliary entrance. So there was some thought and some care taken as we looked at those spaces. I think there will be, you know, that demand, you know, for those upfront spaces. There are also 8 to 12, I believe, other handicap parking stalls near the main entrance in the building as well, in the front few stalls, parking aisles in the larger parking lot. So there will be adequate, handicap spaces, throughout the parking areas.
We had a lot of questions about the size of the building and the amount of space for gathering and meetings and so on. And I think that I will, I'll review this later with you, but I think the point was that these are all needs that the parish has. These are not just ideas that the committee or the architects came up with. There are, somebody asked what happened to the social spacing addition. Well, that is what we're actually providing in the, let me go backwards, in the space. The same amenities that were going to be in the addition have been incorporated into this space. So we have this area and we have this area to be used for social functions and so on. And like I said, Father explained the need for the Children's Liturgy of the Word and the chapel. I mean, these are all spaces that your parish has asked for and needs. And maybe you don't know that they need it, but these did not come out of thin air. If you go back and read the needs assessment report, you'll see that all of the things that are here are the same things that are in that report. There's also a specific question about the reservation chapel. I want to go back to that a little bit. Some people are concerned that it's not central in the church. Well, that's because the altar is the central focal point of the church, not the tabernacle. The liturgy is an action of the assembly, and the tabernacle is a place of reservation of the Blessed Sacrament. So the focus of the worship space should be the altar. And what we have done is we've created a way to see the reservation chapel, and although it may not be apparent from this view, we made sure that every seat in the worship space can see the tabernacle from their seat, with the exception of the few seats that are in close to this wall here on either side. Those seats would not be able to see it because there's a wall in the way. But everyone else, which is what the documents require, is that the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, the tabernacle, be visible to all within the church. So it is, and some people ask, why is it partitioned off with glass? And that's really for two reasons. One, it allows for private prayer and meditation. So if you want to come into church before the worship service and spend some time in prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament, we know that people talk and there's noise and so on, and this private space gives you a place to do that. Also, it allows us to, even reduce the focus further with lighting during the liturgy, because ideally the tabernacle, there's nothing in the tabernacle during the liturgy because the body and blood of Christ is being consecrated in front of us. So there's really no need to even, in theory, wouldn't even need the tabernacle in the room. So it really doesn't belong as a part of the active worship space. It belongs in a separate space. And this way it's visible, it's accessible, it's ideal for private prayer, and it serves the purpose that it was meant to serve. There are also questions, was one question about why we didn't present different options. Well, I think if you, the point is to eventually build a church. And if you just think of the 100 questions we got tonight about one design, I can imagine that we showed you 3 designs, how one would ever get to a decision point. So we leave that work up to the committee. The committee was shown multiple options, and it was their job to come up with the one that best met the needs as stated by the parish. So that's why we only present one option. Let me look at a couple of other questions here. I'm just trying to, there were a couple of questions about, let's see, whoops, yes, I'm gonna go back one more. About, sorry, there were some about seating capacity. We'll talk about that for a second. People were asking, somebody said, attendance has been falling off in the last 10 to 15 years. That's actually not true. We looked at the attendance records for the last 5 years, and they've been increasing every year. The numbers have been going up. So we didn't think it made sense to plan for fewer seats than we had before. And, we got a lot of comments from people saying, I come here for Christmas Eve service. I can't even get in the building, let alone in the worship space. And the committee felt like if we're going to build a new church, we want to build a church that people can get in and can be part of the worship experience. And that would happen not just at Christmas Eve, but every confirmation class and every confirmation, every first communion. You couldn't get everybody in the church. So the seating is based on that. And the questions were asked, wouldn't it be cheaper with less seating? Obviously, it would be. And, if the funding isn't there, maybe that is something that we would have to look at. But right now, I think, as I think Frank said, we really have tried to design the church that the parish has asked for. And that's really what you're seeing today. There were a couple of questions on the organ about whether, what would we do if we didn't put the organ back, or could we save money by getting a refurbished organ? Let me ask the second question first. You can save some money by getting a refurbished organ. It's a bit of a challenge because you have to get the right organ for the particular space. And there are a lot of organs, but they are not free. Well, they say many churches are giving them away for free. That may be true, but it costs at least $100,000 to get an organ out of a church. And we just did this with a church in St. Paul, Minnesota. It cost $1 million to rebuild the organ in the space, and that was for a large organ. So it's not like a piano where you can go get a truck and bring it over and stick it in the church. It is a very complicated process to disassemble and reassemble and refurbish an organ. So it's not necessarily a cost-saving item, but we certainly can be open to that possibility. And if we don't have one, then we might use a digital instrument instead. So that's something that we're trying to plan for everything in the design of the church, but what actually gets into the final design is going to be somewhat driven by the money that's available. So let me see if there are any other repetitive questions. And those are kind of, somebody asked about the materials for the altar and the ambo, and we don't know. They will probably be stone, but we don't know that yet. Somebody asked about lighting options. Yes, of course, there'll be a very good electric lighting system. We chose not to use skylights again because they seem to cause a lot of glare and some other issues. And we carefully looked at how to bring light into the space in the way that would be most beneficial and would have the fewest drawbacks for people sitting in church. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to probably answer all these questions in writing since we have them all. And this way, if your question didn't get answered, we'll make a point of doing that and publish that in some way, because I know there were probably another 50 questions that haven't been asked. Some of them are just things that we don't know the answer to yet, but others we just really didn't have time for. So I don't want people to think we're avoiding any questions. So what I would like to do is just move forward to, we're going to do the poll, but before we do that, sorry, I have to just scroll through all these very quickly. I just wanted to sort of go back now and thinking about the design that you just saw, and I want to have you compare that to the needs assessment that we started with. So one of the goals was to continue to foster a sense of community and welcoming by maintaining the original circular seating arrangement. And I think you can see from the plans that we pretty much maintained that as it was. To provide more natural light in the new church, I think that the renderings show that we are providing two types of natural light. We're providing it up high to flood the space with light, much in the way that the skylights did, but in a more even way. And we're providing stained glass windows at the eye level. So the reason those are stained glass is to block out views of the traffic, but we'll also let in light. We have a very generous gathering space. It's large. It's about the same size, maybe a little bit larger than what was proposed for the addition. The design is definitely not modern. We did have, and I forgot to mention, I think I mentioned it, but there was another question about where we don't have a cry room, but in the space outside the worship space, because that's an all glass partition, that's a space where people would go if they had children that were noisy and they wanted to take out. And then the children's liturgy, the word space also will fulfill the role for families who have children who can be disturbing and they want to have a place to go where they can still, be connected to the liturgy without being in the same room. And of course, we have much more accommodation for the disabled. We have spaces for them to sit and places for them to park. we explained how the tabernacle works, and we talked about the bells. So the consensus is going to ask you two questions. The poll that's going to come up is going to ask you two questions if it works. First is, do you feel that the proposed design reflects the mission of the parish? And I will show you the mission statement in a minute. And you'll have a choice of 5 answers for that. And the second question will be, do you support the general direction for the project that was presented today? And that's not to say, do you like everything about what we showed today? The question is, do you think we're moving in the right direction? If you don't, you can say that you don't. But so that's really the question is this not do you approve this as what we should build, but do you think this is headed in the right direction? So I'm going to put that poll up if that works, and I hope so. And then there'll be one at a time, and then we'll go to the next one after that. 47% strongly agree with that statement. 45% agree. 3% disagree. 2% strongly disagree, and 3% are not sure. And we have 53% strongly agree, 30% agree, 3% disagree, 5% strongly disagree, and 3% are not sure. So that gives us an idea of how close to the mark we are, and we don't ever expect to get 100% out of strongly agree and agree, because that's nearly impossible. But with all the questions and the comments that we've gotten, that the next step that we'll do is we'll take that back to the committee and look at all of those things and see if we need to make any adjustments. And then, as I said, the other thing that will also drive the design is the funding for it. So that we may have to make other changes. And again, your input will be helpful in the things that you feel are most important and least important. And we may have to look at making some cuts on those as well. So I want to thank you all very much for bearing with us tonight, and especially through some technical difficulties, which I'm sure we're all getting tired of. But I would like to ask Father to share his camera and wrap us up tonight. Father, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. First of all, a word of gratitude once again to our committee, to all of the professionals with whom we've been working, and many of whom you have seen this evening for that wonderful presentation. And for all of you, our parishioners, for your constant encouragement, your solidarity, and your prayers. Our parish mission statement says that as a parish, we are called to serve and support those within and beyond our parish community. May the worship space that we build help us with that call. And may the church inspire us and challenge us to always be witnesses of God's love in the world. Let us pray. Lord, as we await your coming during this season of anticipation, fill our lives with your presence. Fulfill our hopes and our dreams. Let the light of the radiant dawn break through as we announce the coming of Emmanuel, God with us. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We wish you and yours a very blessed Christmas.